And we're back for the wrap-up of the Trump impeachment. So it's made it to the House of Representatives. The House has voted on 2 articles of impeachment, and now these articles go before the Senate. What's interesting here, let's do a little bit of some background. So Trump did release something like a transcript of the call between him and President Zelensky. And this does make it a little bit difficult to get behind this as a, I don't know, is this a question of conduct or is this a question of criminal activity? Because most of the time when you commit a crime in these conditions and to be charged with obstruction, you have to try to hide it. But because Trump releases this transcript, then there are things that are out there in the open. And eventually the aid to Ukraine, the military aid, is released. So they end up getting their money. So this becomes more tricky to figure out, is this about obstruction or is this about misconduct? And those are 2 very different levels of criminality in terms of both in regular crime land, but also in terms of political crime land. Like which, one is worse. To obstruct is definitely worse than misconduct. It's interesting too because, the Democrats have passed on several opportunities to start an impeachment investigation. And most of those have been because they were really complex. No one's going to read the 800 some odd page Mueller report. The American public can barely digest something like that. The Democrats had made a strategic decision to move forward on this Ukraine affair because it seemed like it was understandable. It was very clear-cut. Something had been done. That thing that had been done was an abuse of power in the Democrats' point of view, and thus it deserved an investigation and potentially an impeachment. And they found a lot of evidence that there was an abuse of power. There was potential obstruction. And so that warranted moving it to the next level. And so the next level becomes the actual trial. So if you remember the chain of events, just being impeached by the House, you are impeached, but you are not removed. To actually be removed from office, you have to be found guilty during the impeachment trial. So this next slide here, this is Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice John Roberts, and he is swearing in the members of the Senate. So members of the Senate, they all have to be there. They have to sit at their little wooden desks. They don't look particularly comfortable, in my opinion, and they are obligated to listen and pay attention. You need 67 members of the Senate to actually vote yes, I find him guilty of the 2 charges for Trump to actually be removed from office. It was always a tough sell, right? The Republican Party has been really strongly on message. They have been able to stay together and move as a unit, and Mitch McConnell, who is Republican number 1 in the Senate, has done a really remarkable job holding his Republican Party together and keeping them together. And we'll talk a little bit about the, who was bringing the arguments for Donald Trump to, not protect him. We'll talk a little bit about who are the people who are arguing on the side of Donald Trump and who are the people who are arguing on the side of the House. Just one other fun fact to mention, though, before we move on, is that you can't have Starbucks on the floor of the Senate. You can't pound Skittles. You can't order Chinese. You don't have the benefit of your laptop to, zone out. There's no ear pods to, I'm just gonna, chill and listen to beaches. I don't want to pay attention to this. You have to be, there's a certain level of engagement is required. You're allowed to have water and milk, and you have to be there until it is dismissed. The trial is overseen by Chief Justice John Roberts. The people who are making their cases would come up and sit and at various times speak up in the front where they have those 2 empty tables, and the senators are required to remain silent and listen. So very unusual behavior for, what's typical for these guys. So there are 7 impeachment managers. They're listed here. I've got a picture of them I will show you next. But these are the people who were involved in the investigation. They know what's going on. They know all of the evidence. They've seen the documentation. They've helped draft the articles of impeachment. And their role is to essentially make the best case that they can that Trump is guilty of these two offenses. They take turns speaking. Essentially, the deal that was worked out with Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer is that each side would have about 24 hours total time to make their case, and then there would be questions from the senators. Those questions would be answered, and then they would vote. They were not going to bring in witnesses. They were not going to subpoena more documentation. They're certainly not going to bring President Trump in to testify. And so we have this, I love this picture. Here are the House managers, that's the term that they're given, the impeachment managers, coming in, and they're going to walk into the Senate chambers and they're going to start making their case. And the crux of their case is this allegation that Trump withheld military aid and offered a White House meeting to pressure Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden, who is one of his political rivals, as well as Joe Biden's son, Hunter, who for a time served on the board of Burisma, a Ukrainian energy company, while his father was vice president. Now, a little bit about Hunter Biden. Is Hunter Biden getting by the awesome name of his dad? Yes. Is Hunter Biden getting jobs and making his way in the world by the sheer fact that he is a Biden? Absolutely. And is that a crime? No. Is it something that a lot of rich kids do? Absolutely. You know, it's hard making your way in the world. It is completely unclear if Hunter Biden has done anything illegal. It's likely that he hasn't. Has Hunter Biden done anything morally reprehensible? Has he committed a crime? Likely no. Hunter Biden just has the benefit of being a Biden, and he has used that to his advantage, which, like I said, many rich kids do. So Trump's impeachment defense team is pretty amazing. It's non-traditional, and it's got a range of individuals. Some of these individuals Ken Starr. We talked a lot about Ken Starr when we covered the Clinton impeachment. He was on board for Team Trump now. We've talked a little bit about Alan Dershowitz. Alan Dershowitz, there's an article up about him and his involvement in the defense of Jeffrey Epstein. So he's quite the character too. There are a range of people here who gather together to sort of set the stage of what is Trump's best defense. And essentially, here's the little panel of pictures of people who are going to bat for Team Trump. They argue that the president was justified in asking for an investigation because Ukraine has a history of corruption. A history of corruption, like that bit, is absolutely true. They also say that there was an ongoing investigation of Burisma. And so Trump was well within his rights to ask for an investigation of that as well. Also, you can't be mad about withholding money because the money ultimately got sent. So there's no quid pro quo there because ultimately they got their money. A lot of the concerns had to do with process. A lot of the concerns raised by the House Defense Team was that, this is a lot of bluster over something that's really minor. And a lot of people got worried about something that ultimately, didn't come to pass. The aid was held up, but it eventually flowed. So everybody just, calmed down. During this time, you also have Mick Mulvaney gives a press conference where he says, look, you all just need to get over it because this is how the world works. If you want something from somebody else, you're going to offer something to that person. And if they don't do what you want, you're not going to give it to them. Now, what is unclear is during this time if Ukraine actually ever started an investigation. And it seems, from what I can tell, that they never did. They never opened up an investigation. So Trump didn't get what he wanted at that moment. So they present their cases. The Senate ultimately comes to this vote. It is very much along party lines. You would need 67 to convict on each of these articles of impeachment, and you can see they're nowhere close. Only 48 and 47, respectively, vote to convict. The only person to break ranks is Mitt Romney, who is just getting beat up in the press in the days after impeachment for breaking ranks. The political nature of impeachment is one thing, and then the political nature of the vote is something else altogether. In previous impeachments, you have seen a number of people break with their party and vote their conscience, vote a conviction. You do not see that here. And so that either speaks to the weakness of the arguments, maybe. It speaks to the power of the party, maybe. It speaks to other things going on. And it's a really complex and intricate interaction that happens. And so when you read about this or you see things about it, I want you to keep all those things in mind. This isn't straightforward, and people don't vote 100% just based off of the conviction of their feelings. They're voting based off of a complex calculus of what is going to happen after they vote. Because they know this isn't voting in a vacuum. There will be fallout. There will be consequences. And we see that almost immediately. So after Trump is acquitted, he gets to work. He fires Ambassador Sondland. You're out of work. He fires Lieutenant Colonel Vindman and his twin brother, Lieutenant Colonel Yevgeny, who was a senior lawyer and ethics official for the National Security Council and had nothing to do with the whole affair. And in fact, he had told his brother that he thought it was a bad idea that he go and publicly appear. But both of them get fired. They're not out of work. Well, maybe I don't think they're out of work right now, but they were taken on at the Pentagon. So even though they lost their jobs in the executive office, in the executive branch, they still can eat. They're okay. They're not probably happy, but they're okay. So this was seen as like, wow, we've really, Trump is emboldened. He's really his own thing here, because he turns right around and says, you know what? This is what happens. You defied me and my order to not cooperate, and you cooperated, you testified, and so you're out of a job. Here's the crazy thing. The whole process took 4 months. It's super short. 6 months, though, if you go all the way back to July when the phone call happened. This is the shortest impeachment process that's ever happened in U.S. history. The process for Clinton took, I think, right about a year. The process for Nixon, over a year. So 4 months is really brief. The other crazy thing is that 5 weeks after Trump is impeached is when we have our global pandemic. It's completely unrelated to impeachment, but the whole time that I have been thinking about this and preparing this lecture and even presenting it here, I just feel like that was a lifetime ago when Trump was impeached. So talking about impeachment, looking at this stuff, reading these articles, if it feels like it was forever ago, you are not alone, because we are now living the world of coronavirus and what it's like to be in social distancing. So that's where we're going to wrap up here for the Trump impeachment. Please look on Classroom. There is a couple of additional short assignments and readings for you to do. And next time I speak to you, we will be moving on to our next content area. So be well, and I will talk to you again soon.